Welcome to SquashWarp Episode 4 in Kerbal Space Program Science Sandbox. The Agravaine airplane, this time being flown by our test pilot extraordinaire, Elsted Kerman, who we didn't meet last time because his test flight of this design was extremely boring. But this time he's going to try to beat a speed record. Now, keeping in mind, we've already sent Kerbals to space. We've already passed all the speed records that planes like this can possibly surpass on their own. But he still wants to do a powered flight in the atmosphere speed record, just as an homage to the history that he should have no reason to know about. So he's going to do some tests to see just how fast he can make this passenger plane fly. And we have some time to kill, because we're waiting a week on our launch window, as well as we're waiting for the scanning of the moon's surface to tell us where we might want to land. Although, you know, in all honesty, when we land on the moon, we just kind of pick a spot that looks like there'll be sunlight, and we go. It's really not so crucial to know what's flat. But in any case, here he is. Accelerating, trying to let gravity help, but you know, as we get into the thicker part of the atmosphere, there's more drag. The engine works better, but just the whole plan form of this plane is designed really for lots of lift and easy gliding, and it's still so full of fuel. If I'd thought about this at all, I would have emptied out most of those tanks to try to get a speed record on this. But mostly, Elsted just wanted to take it out for a spin and do a little bit of research as far as how does this plane perform and how can we improve on its design. Speaking of which, what is he doing? Elsted, you're supposed to be our top test pilot. Get down, straighten out. Come on there, sir. It's a twitchy plane, let's put it that way. But thankfully we don't really need to fly it anymore. Alright, here's the K1 plane. K actually still apparently the name of a Knight of the Round Table. Honestly, I'd never heard of most of these Knights of the Round Table, but I trust Wikipedia. Or whatever website I'm using here, the wiki that gives me random sets of names. Passing Mach 1 already in a climb. This is a rocket-powered plane that doesn't even need to be dragged up to altitude by a support plane, which is good because that would be way more complicated to make. So he's got full power. We're passing Mach 2 now. This is the fastest anyone has flown in an airplane. Mach 3, and just before the engine burns out, we hit Mach 3.4. So Elsted makes history somewhat retroactively, but still, he's still a hero to me, which I'm sure he appreciates. Now he's got to try to come back in for a landing. We have not tested this plane in its landing behavior. We just kind of slapped it together. And that's why we call Elsted, right? He's our test pilot. He can make anything fly, and he is prepared to throw expensive airplanes away because, first of all, he has a parachute, and he doesn't really care about the plane as long as he can break some records. The other reason is that somebody may have mentioned to him that there is no money in this playthrough, so nobody cares how many planes we wreck as long as our Kerbals come back safely. And trying to come in for a landing, honestly, I was trying to reach the water, because these days the water is really a soft place to land, but we don't have the glide slope for it. Not enough wing, too much mass. So, deploy the landing gear and hope that we don't accidentally roll into the ocean. Flare, we want to touch gently. Oh my, whoa. I always am surprised by that particular moment there. He did a pretty serious front wheel balance there. Anyway, planting a flag to honor the occasion. And after fast-forwarding a few days, getting closer to our launch window, we are also noticing that the crocodile scanning probe out at the moon has almost completed its survey with its radar scanning altimeter sensor thing. And we launch our next probe, the tortoise, or tortoise, as I watch so many British YouTubers that it's hard not to accidentally start saying things the way that a British person might. I assume that's at least that's the way that a British person that I have watched on YouTube says. Anyway, regardless, we're using our same kind of design that we've been doing, some solid rocket boosters to help us go up, and we end up with a really, really steep ascent here. It's quite horrible, actually. But this thing should have plenty of delta V. We're not really worried. I overbuilt at every stage. You just kind of round up, you know. You kind of figure out how much delta V you need for each step and then round way up. I also kind of want to reach more than one biome on the moon, so I meant to overbuild it. But, you know, if we can't do that, we can't do that. Deploying the fairing there, still using the KW rocketry fairing base, although I do miss the old non-procedural KW fairings. I'm going to try to figure out how to get those back in, but I think that I would also need to install Ferrum Aerospace, and there's just a lot of steps involved, so I'm going to look at that and see if I can make it work. This is a little trick using precise node, and even if you don't have precise node, you get your orbit out to where you want it to be, and then you can adjust the timing of when you do your burn and really get a very low periaps around the moon without doing extra delta V. You can just adjust when you do the burn, and there's usually an exact moment where you can get a really the lowest possible delta V from your specific orbit to do a moon encounter. As you can see, we've unlocked the taller, the double-size KW rocketry fuel tanks. They're a little bit longer than the stock tanks, and they have this very fancy white finish, which is quite nice in space, especially with the scatterer sunlight. So this is meant to be a moon sample return mission. We've never landed on the moon before, but we're going to go ahead and go right for the sample return mission profile because we're daring. That's what we do. We launch right into things, right? Actually, launching right into things would be sending 4 Kerbals to the moon right now with the tech that we have, but we don't want to risk our Kerbals' lives when we've never been there before, right? And we should get a fair amount of science from this as we zoom in to very low periaps. I thought about going straight for a landing burn, but we'll see in a second why that doesn't really matter. So we don't have enough delta V in this lower stage to complete this burn, but we have that decoupler on the fairing that we can switch to and get to our next stage, except, whoa, everything is going flying, and this is the return vehicle, which incidentally I'm very proud of. So everything is everywhere. I've just scattered my spaceship across the space around the moon. That upper stage engine is still firing, even though it's just firing into the decoupler, which we can't do anything about. I'm checking to see if I have even any science experiments on this, and I don't. And all of the science has gone flying. There's a barometer floating freely through space. Yeah. Once again, I let myself be confused by the staging system for the KW fairing bases. All I needed to do was put a decoupler on there and I wouldn't be confused. But basically, you can set in the vehicle assembly building whether you want the decoupler to be part of the staging, but it will always happen at the same time, at least on the install I have. It will happen at the same time as the fairing staging, and I wanted to decouple the fairing separately. But, as you might remember from the previous episode, that caused the failure of a previous orbital science probe. So anyway, so we've got our return vehicle with our science container and no science in it in a very stable and useless orbit of the moon. This is the Gareth, our new favorite airplane, being flown once again by Duddrin and Stachell Kerman, and we are going on our most ambitious airplane flight yet. Actually going back to where we had been trying to reach in the previous video. We are going to do some more science at the poles in what turned out to be quite a pretty airplane. I'm not used to making stuff that actually looks like it would work in real life, but using those B9 wings and the B9 fins with a couple of stock fins on the end, because I don't have any control surfaces for the wing yet. And a pair of the regular jet engines, we can actually get up to supersonic speeds in this plane, and when we are later in the flight, when we don't have much fuel left, we actually are pushing Mach 1.6 And Stachell is being a pretty good sport about it, flying up near the flat layer of clouds that I appreciate for their way that they don't ruin my frame rate. But it does make kind of a funny effect when we just kind of push the boundary of the clouds and we're looking at the kind of surface of the atmosphere here. But moving right along, I found a stable configuration where we could bring the nose up a bit and then turn on the SAS, go to 4 times time acceleration, and then as the curvature of the planet goes away from us, the SAS kind of slowly brings the nose back up, and we climb back up. And when we start to kind of lose speed, I just tapped F to temporarily disable the SAS, and we would drop back down, accelerate again. And here we are reaching this beautiful mountain range that every time I've ever visited I really enjoy, but it's a bit far away to go to. But Duddrin is looking out the window, enjoying the sights. Tempted to go in and do a flyby between those peaks, but we found a stable orientation for the plane, and we're making good time. So Stachell asks if can we just stick to the mission. But we just got a couple of science experiments. There's a few more biomes up at the North Pole, and then we'll be basically complete. We still haven't visited the desert or the Badlands, and they're on their way to the tundra, the ice shelf, and the what is it? The Arctic plate. What is it called? I can't remember. But we find that we've slowly gone off course, and this doesn't take them very long. We were about half an hour of in-game time. I generally don't do these kinds of things because I don't have the patience, but this plane was actually stable and fast enough that before we know it, we're looking at the Aurora Borealis, which is quite beautiful and kind of hilariously active when you accelerate it by 4 times and then by another 4 times in the video editing. So we're reaching our polar regions and might want to turn towards land to try to get some tundra science. We're also noticing that our intakes are glowing red, and Duddrin turns on his temperature gauges and discovers that his engines are about to overheat and explode, which he does not mention to Stachell. He just, patiently and very calmly turns towards the land in case we have to do an emergency landing. The jet engines have had this overheat mechanic for a while, but I've honestly never used them for a long enough period of time or high enough speeds and altitudes to notice this heating problem. But as soon as we get kind of lower down, drag starts to slow us down a bit. Our temperature goes back to normal, and we've now officially reached the poles. The tundra here. And Stachell's hard at work collecting all of the science experiments that are available, but most of them just report, hey, we're flying at Kerman, so that's not very helpful. I think this plane is also substantially larger than most planes that I build, and it its grace belies its great wingspan and length. But I like this type of design, and I may be using it again in the future. Coming in for a bit of an uneasy landing. We're not quite sure we're going to be fine, but we find a flat spot at the last minute. And it's back to science collecting in the old tradition of Duddrin and Stachell, where she just pops her head out and uses her Gumby arms to go grab all of the science out of the nearby containers, close them back up, and then hop back in the capsule so that she can do it again. You can get a surface sample from outside, and it gives you just a little bit more science. Whoa, she's overheating. That get as far away as possible from the airplane. I don't know if she was just too close to the hot air intakes, but that scared me. We come out, pose for a picture. Duddrin gets the honor of planting the flag since he has not done so yet. The tundra. And after lifting the landing gear back up, since we still have not invented ladders, it's on to the next biome. We need to turn the engines back on, which we turned off because we were afraid that we were going to overheat our poor Kerbals while they were on EVA. Turning the brakes off. We soar back into the sky, and right there, wow, there's our next landing site. We barely even had to take off. Turning the engines down, we can just glide in. We want a little bit more speed because we're still not in a new biome yet. I don't know what happened there. We are clearly on the northern ice shelf, but we can get a little further into it. And this landing should be, the easiest ever. It's just completely flat, nothing to worry about. But still, there's no such thing as a simple landing when you're going, 50, 70 meters per second. But we do just fine. And those brakes work fantastically. I thought about adding reverse thrust to the brake action group, or at least giving it some other kind of action group so we can use reverse thrust on those engines, but that's just asking for me to accidentally stall myself in midair while I'm flying along, and then suddenly the engines are facing backwards and we fall out of the sky. And we don't want to do that to our Kerbals. They've been working very hard and flying very well. Constant G spikes is the thing, and Duddrin does some disco twitching while we sort out our time accelerated stability. I fly almost this entire flight in 4 times physical time acceleration in the game because this is a great distance. We're approaching the site of the landing, Malfry Kerman's finally successful flight in Agravaine 3, but we're still not at the poles, or we're still not at the ice caps biome. That's what I was trying to remember. We have found kind of the roof of the world in the form of the non-volumetric cloud textures. And over there, Duddrin and Stachell spy some very sort of cream-colored snowy peaks, and we think that's got to be a different biome from this ice shelf here. So let's make our way there. There's probably also this biome on the South Pole. I don't think I've ever been to the South Pole of Kerman. That may be a project for another day, and perhaps for a faster airplane, because while this plane is performing quite well, this did get tedious by the end here. But as we approach these, frankly, terrifying mountains, it feels like we're arriving at the boundaries of Mordor here. And Duddrin and Stachell, despite having well-heated cabins that are probably capable of going to space, honestly, they're starting to get a cold chill when they look down at the craggy, uneven surface. And Duddrin pulls a high G, 0 thrust turn to bleed off speed and try to find anywhere to land that might look flat, and then we realize we're much closer to the surface than we thought. So quickly banking, trying to get over this ridge. We have no fuel left to increase our speed if we need more lift, so if we stall, that's it. So we've got to make it over this little hump, and then it's time to turn on the air brakes and come down. Even though we're going to be landing downhill, we've got to touch down now because we're going to run out of velocity and stall. But after a safe landing, we have successfully reached our new biome and the final biome for this flight. Thankfully, we live in a world where if Kerbals are on the ground, they can go home anytime that they want. So after doing more of our same science experiments and doing a bit of a twisty slide on the frozen surface of these foothills, Duddrin and Stachell Kerman get to come home and warm up from their frigid trip up to the north of the Kerbal planet. And that means we've got more science that we can spend here in the research and development facility. So looking around, we end up picking the fuel tanks option. We're going to get that large engines node the next time we have some science. Speaking of which, we can hop back over here because our scan of the moon is finally completed after several days. And we can actually transmit the science from the radar scanner, and that will bring us up over 90. We can then pop back over to R&D, hop in, and get those bigger engines, and then we'll be all set for next week. Thanks for joining me.